What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video I'm going to be going through my top 20 redraft wide receiver rankings. Yesterday I went through my top 20 running backs. Pivoting over to the wide receivers, I'll be going through my quarterbacks and tight ends over the next couple of days also. I feel like this year is really interesting for wide receivers. I think there are some pretty clear tiers, through the first maybe 8, 9 wide receivers here. But I feel like after that, it really just turns into an absolute mess. So let's just dive right into it. And as always, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. We're going to start off here with my wide receiver 1 in tier 1. It's going to be CeeDee Lamb. He's coming off a season where he finished as the wide receiver 1 in both points per game and total points, averaged 23.7 PPR points per game, and this is pretty much the same offensive situation in 2024, so not a ton of reason to not go back to the well here on CeeDee Lamb. Also still very young, so there's not a ton of risk of him falling off a cliff. Obviously his production could slip a little bit just coming off such a peak season, but he doesn't have a risk of decreasing in his ability. Now also in tier 1, going with Tyreek Hill as my wide receiver 2, he finished just behind CeeDee Lamb with 23.5 PPR points per game. He's running it back with Tua, another guy in a very similar offensive situation. The only kind of concern here, and it's just what I talked about with CeeDee Lamb, is that Tyreek Hill is getting up there in age a little bit. He's 30 years old. He at least has some risk of potentially slowing down, starting to fall off a little bit. Not saying he's going to completely tank, but it's just, an extra piece of information we have to consider here. And then my final tier 1 wide receiver, it's going to be Ja'Marr Chase. I understand he's coming off a disappointing 2023. He finished as the wide receiver 12 in points per game, but I really don't think it was anything within his own control. It's not like he had everything go right for him and he just didn't produce. Joe Burrow had the calf injury early on, which greatly hindered their offense. And then he has a season-ending injury in Week 11, which obviously is also going to cap Ja'Marr Chase's upside. He averaged 17.9 points per game as a rookie, 20.9 points per game in year 2. It seemed like year 3 was going to be the time he really took that leap, and it just didn't happen due to the circumstances around him. But with Burrow healthy heading into 2024, I expect Ja'Marr Chase to be putting up that high-end wide receiver 1 production. Now, pivoting into tier 2, still really high on these wide receivers. Think they have high-end wide receiver 1 upside. We're going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown here. This is probably one spot higher than most people have him, but he's coming off a season where he did finish as the wide receiver 4 in points per game, 20.7. Another guy in a very similar offensive situation. A lot of the top weapons around him, including himself, have gotten locked up this offseason. He was top 5 in targets, target share, target rate, red zone targets, receptions, receiving yards, yak, touchdowns. He's a huge focal point of this offense, coming off a huge year 3. I don't think we've seen his peak season yet. We know he can give you 20 plus points per game. Love him here as my wide receiver 4. And then my last tier 2 wide receiver, it's going to be Justin Jefferson. And this is not, hating on Justin Jefferson, having him here as my wide receiver 5. Some people are probably going to have him higher. In my opinion, Justin Jefferson is the best wide receiver in the NFL. If you put every wide receiver, in the same landing spot, the same situation, Jefferson would probably be my top guy here. I just think his quarterback situation is shakier than the guys ahead of him, right? You look at CeeDee Lamb, he has Dak locked in. Tyreek Hill, you have Tua, and in that Mike McDaniel offense is going to be good enough. Ja'Marr Chase has Burrow. Amon-Ra St. Brown has Jared Goff. Justin Jefferson's going from Kirk Cousins to either Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy, which even if J.J. McCarthy ends up being a really good quarterback in his rookie year, it's going to be a step down, at least in the short term, but he's still an insanely talented player, 19 plus PPR points per game in the last 3 seasons. He's been a top 5 wide receiver in each of those 3 years, so I still think he's going to produce. I just don't know if he's going to have the quarterback play to carry him to a true elite ceiling season, but still someone, who should be drafted very early on in fantasy drafts. Now, pivoting into tier 3, I feel like this is the last tier that I feel really confident with, and we're going to go with Puka Nacua here as my wide receiver 6. Had the 3rd most PPR points all time for a rookie wide receiver. Finishes the wide receiver 6 in points per game, and he did that while only scoring 6 touchdowns in 17 games. So there's reason to believe that he could improve on that crazy season he had last year. He was 6th in target rate, 7th in targets, 4th in receiving yards, 5th in yak. I've seen some people maybe thinking Kupp's going to make a big comeback here, really challenge Puka for the wide receiver 1 spot. I'm not buying that, honestly. I mean, you just got to accept the fact that Puka Nacua came in, had an insane rookie year, Cooper Kupp's getting up there in age. I think Puka's going to be the guy moving forward, and that's why I have him here as my wide receiver 6. Behind Puka, I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson, and I just don't think we can underestimate the massive quarterback upgrade he's getting here. He's going from the combo of Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and Trevor Siemian to Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. In 2023, the Jets had the third fewest passing yards and the fewest passing touchdowns, so it's pretty much impossible for him to make a big fantasy impact. He still has over 1,000 receiving yards in his first 2 seasons. With strong quarterback play, I'm really expecting Garrett Wilson to have a true breakout this year, and I think he's going to deliver that wide receiver 1 production. We're going to be wrapping up tier 3 with A.J. Brown, and I feel like he's the last wide receiver 1 I'm like truly confident in. Firmly believe he's going to finish here as a top 12 guy. He's finished between wide receiver 6 and 8 in 3 of the last 4 seasons. In his 2 years with the Eagles, he's averaged 17.6 and 17 PPR points per game. He's coming off career highs in targets and receptions. We've seen seasons where A.J. Brown has been ultra efficient and scored big touchdown numbers. We've also seen years like last year where he stacked a lot of volume. I think he could break into that high-end wide receiver 1 territory if he's able to combine those two. It hasn't happened yet, but I still think the ceiling's there. But even without that, a solid mid-tier wide receiver 1 play. Now, after A.J. Brown, this is where the wide receiver position, at least in my opinion, turns into a mess. I think there is such a small difference between the back-end wide receiver 1s through the wide receiver 2s. I really can't remember another year like this. Like, typically, you have the guys you want as your back-end wide receiver 1s, your high-end wide receiver 2s, and then, the stacked portion comes like back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. They're all kind of jumbled together. I think we're just in this unique spot this year where you have veteran wide receivers who have been elite options in previous years who are kind of on their way down. You have young wide receivers on their way up who maybe haven't, hit a monster season yet. And then there are just like other proven wide receivers who are in crowded situations, thinking like the 49ers guys, the Texans guys, maybe even like the Colts, their wide receiver room there. So it's just a very unique setup we have this season. And I think it's really going to be interesting when we're getting into our redraft leagues. I think on different platforms, you're going to be able to get different players all over the place. Some guys may be going like early round 2 on certain platforms. Those dudes may be going late round 3 on other ones just because the wide receiver position is so kind of mixed together at this point. So we're going to start off in tier 4, and this may seem like a cop-out, but this is all going to be tier 4. I really do believe these players are that close together, but I do have them ranked here. So starting off tier 4, going to go with Marvin Harrison Jr., and it's pretty much unheard of for a rookie wide receiver to be ranked and drafted this high. If you don't want to pick him this high, I get it. I mean, it seems I'm ranking him here, and it seems crazy. Like, it doesn't seem super great. I wouldn't want to draft him here as the wide receiver 9. But like I talked about, the wide receiver landscape here, it's kind of all over the place. Marvin Harrison Jr. was a great prospect. He has a great landing spot, and we've seen these rookie wide receivers come in and produce right away, especially when they land in solid spots, right? Guys like Garrett Wilson, Drake London, they didn't have the production early on. They were great prospects, but it's because we have to look at the landing spot. They did not get solid landing spots. Marvin Harrison Jr. getting paired with Kyler Murray, this is a great situation. Puka Nacua, 17.6 points per game last year. Jamar Chase, 17.9 points per game in 2021. Justin Jefferson, 17.1 in 2020. So pretty consistently, we've been getting these nice rookie seasons. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. could definitely be the next rookie to break into that group. Then behind Marvin Harrison Jr., we're going with Drake London. And I'm a big Drake London guy. I've been a big fan of his talent, and even with that said, it does feel gross to have him here as the number 10 wide receiver, considering the fact that he was the wide receiver 43 and 42 in points per game through his first 2 seasons. I also do just want to mention here, I'm kind of shooting for upside here at the wide receiver position, right? So if I'm drafting someone as like a back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2, like it's fine if they just live up to that production, right? Give you like 15 points per game, 15.5 points per game, but I'd rather shoot for some of the guys who do have the upside, so just keep that in mind. So I do think Drake London can make a big jump this season. He's getting a massive quarterback upgrade with Kirk Cousins coming in. Last year, the Falcons were 22nd in passing yards, 26th in passing touchdowns, and not only were they not great as a passing offense, they just had a very interesting offensive philosophy with Arthur Smith where they were not focusing on getting their top weapons involved, whether it was Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. the offense was just not centered around these guys, so there wasn't a ton of volume and touchdowns to go around anyway. And then there also wasn't any prioritization on getting these guys the ball. Now he has Kirk Cousins here, completely new coaching staff, and in Cousins' last 3 full seasons, he's thrown for at least 4,200 yards, 29 touchdowns. Kirk Cousins is going to bring the volume to these weapons, and I think Drake London has a similar opportunity to like Garrett Wilson to really just leap into that wide receiver 1 production. I know it seems like a massive jump because he's been, a wide receiver 4, but I think it could happen based on the quarterback play. I'm a believer in the talent, and that's why I have Drake London here as my wide receiver 10. Now after Drake London, we're going to go with a back-to-back 49ers wide receivers. Brandon Ayuk at number 11, Deebo Samuel at number 12. Now, Ayuk was the wide receiver 16 in points per game last year. He was second in yards per target, yards per reception, and yards per team pass attempt. I will say it's tough to bank on that efficiency year after year because he was so efficient last season, but I also just think this 49ers offense is so good that all these dudes are going to find some success. Deebo last year was the wide receiver 13 in points per game. Like I mentioned, the target competition, there's a ton of weapons. Ayuk, Deebo, Kittle, CMC, you now add in Ricky Pearsall. But all those dudes stayed incredibly healthy last year. All 4 of those guys combined to miss 5 total games. I'm not going to be like wishing injury on anyone, but that's just so unlikely to happen, right? 4 dudes missing 5 combined games. That's very, very rare. And I just think an injury to any of these dudes kind of bumps up the other 3, right? If CMC goes down, they're probably going to shift to a little more pass heavy. The running back's probably not going to be as involved in the receiving game. If Brandon Ayuk goes down, Deebo Samuel gets a boost. If Deebo goes down, Ayuk gets a boost. So I think these guys produced like higher end wide receiver 2 production last year with no injuries. I think there is some upside. If we get some injuries this season. Obviously, we don't want it to happen to any individual guy, but injuries would open up, I think, these guys' fantasy ceilings. And then you just kind of want to be betting on that 49ers offense. Next up is going to be Chris Olave. He's coming off a wide receiver 19 season. I really like Chris Olave as a player. I don't love the situation. With Carr at quarterback, I'm just not sure what his ultimate ceiling is. I do think it's reasonable to project that he takes another step forward here heading into year 3. He's been solid as a rookie, solid in year 2. He could also probably hit more in the touchdown department, 9 touchdowns in 2 seasons. But I just don't know if he has that like ability to break into the mid-tier wide receiver 1 territory, not because of him as a player, just because of the current offensive situation he's in. Now behind Olave, we're going with a veteran wide receiver here. Going with Davante Adams. I feel like he's a tough player to rank at this point. It did seem like he started showing signs of slipping last year. He's 31 years old, but this dude was targeted all over the place in 2023. He was second in targets, target share, target rate, red zone targets. He was first in air yard share, and he only ended up 9th in receptions and 15th in receiving yards. He was the wide receiver 15 in points per game. In previous seasons, you're telling me Davante Adams was like the number 2 targeted wide receiver. I'm telling you the dude was a top 3, at worst top 5 fantasy wide receiver. And you could definitely blame the quarterback play. Like, it wasn't good last year with Jimmy G, Aiden O'Connell. It was bad. There's no way around it. But is it going to be like significantly better this year with either Aiden O'Connell again or Gardner Minshew? You also have the added target competition of Brock Bowers. I don't know. It just seems like a tough spot where he was in a pretty good spot target-wise last year. Didn't really deliver for fantasy. He's getting up there in age. I think you're risking him slipping on a not great passing attack. It's just going to be tough for me to have him much higher than this. If you're just going to like throw away last year and be like all in on him because he's been a high-end wide receiver 1 for a very long time, I get it. But I do think there are some concerns we have to worry about here. After Davante Adams, going with Nico Collins. And I feel like the Texans probably have the most interesting wide receiver room to really break down. I feel like people are going to prefer, a different member of this big 3. There's real reasons to, prefer Stephon Diggs or to prefer Nico Collins, even to prefer Tank Dell. But when we're looking at Nico Collins here, I think he has the nice balance of having the chemistry within this offense while also having great production last season. There were 8 games last year where Nico Collins and Tank Dell were both healthy, playing together. Nico Collins averaged 17.6 PPR points per game. Tank Dell averaged 17.2. I feel like people aren't connecting that when they played together, Tank Dell and Nico Collins were very, very similar in their production. They both would have been mid-tier wide receiver 1s over a full season. I do think the addition of Stephon Diggs kind of caps the upside of all three of these dudes. But I also think you have to expect the Texans to go way more pass heavy than they did last year. CJ Stroud was a rookie. I understand wanting to kind of ease him in. I also don't think they knew what they really had in terms of their weapons heading into the year. Like Tank Dell was a day 2 pick, no guarantee he was hitting. Nico Collins really hadn't done a ton in his first 2 seasons. All those dudes came in, they played great, but they were 15th in pass attempts per game. They were 12th in pass rate. So even though they're bringing in another weapon, I don't think they're going to be competing for the same number of targets. I feel like those pass attempt numbers have to go up. But just with Dell coming off the season-ending injury, Diggs entering this new offense after kind of tanking towards the end of last season, Nico Collins is going to be my choice to be the top wide receiver from this wide receiver room. Then after Collins, we're going to another wide receiver room with DJ Moore as my wide receiver 16. I think in this one, it's a little bit more clear. DJ Moore is going to be my clear top option here for the Bears. He's coming off a wide receiver 9 point per game season, the best season of his career, and it was without great quarterback play. I like Justin Fields, but from a passing perspective, he was not getting elite passing quarterback play out of Justin Fields. He had a career high in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. I think he's getting the upgrade here with Caleb Williams. Even though there's going to be target competition, I think Keenan Allen, I think he's going to be able to step in, play more of a wide receiver 2 role. He's had some injury concerns. Rome Odunze coming in as a rookie. I feel like there's a nice pocket for DJ Moore to come in and still put up a really nice season here in 2024. Then we're actually going to go back to the Texans wide receiver room, and this might be surprising to some people. I'm going with Tank Dell. I'm going to be very, very in on Tank Dell. I've seen pretty consistently across multiple platforms, Tank Dell is pretty buried behind both Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs, and I don't really get it. Like I said earlier, when Dell and Collins were both healthy, he averaged 17.2 PPR points per game. I feel like this is just being thrown out. Puka's insane, amazing, record-setting rookie year was 17.6 PPR points per game. They were very, very close. And I can't remember the last time we saw a rookie wide receiver ball out and then just get so slept on heading into the next season. Typically, a rookie does literally anything, and people go crazy. They're so ready for them to take another jump in year 2, and that's just not what we're getting here out of Tank Dell. And also keep in mind that 17.2 point per game number was more than Stephon Diggs' average last year as Josh Allen's clear-cut wide receiver 1. I just don't think Tank Dell's going to come in and be the odd man out. I understand there's some injury risk, and if we're getting, bad news medically, then, I'll move him down. But he had the leg thing last year, obviously ended his season, and then he got shot this offseason, but I believe he's all good from that. So assuming he has good health, I'm just going to be betting on the great young player coming off an awesome season with a top quarterback. Typically, you make that bet, it's going to work out in your favor. Moving over to Jalen Waddle here as my wide receiver 18. He's been very consistent over 3 seasons, hasn't flashed a super high ceiling, 15.4, 15.3, 14.2 PPR points per game. If Tyreek Hill's healthy, Waddle's just a solid wide receiver 2. In a bigger season, he could be a high-end wide receiver 2. Worse season, probably more the back end. But I do think he has some upside here that hasn't really come to fruition yet. But if Tyreek Hill were to get injured, I feel like Waddle instantly becomes a wide receiver 1 because he just steps right into that Tyreek Hill role, getting some more manufactured touches. I think his volume would increase a lot. So we haven't really seen Hill miss an extended period of time, but if it were to happen, I feel like Jalen Waddle becomes very, very valuable. After Waddle, going to go with Mike Evans. Evans is someone I had a tough time ranking. I know there are going to be people who really dislike this ranking, want him to be higher. He's coming off a wide receiver 10 season in points per game. So, based on that, Baker's coming back. I should probably have him higher than wide receiver 19. He also has not finished worse than wide receiver 16 since 2017. But I want you guys to hear this argument and tell me what you think. So Bucs former offensive coordinator Dave Canales went to the Panthers to be their head coach. They hired a new offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen. This was not an internal hire, someone from Canales' coaching staff. This was someone from the McVay coaching tree. And heading into 2024, I think the production between Mike Evans and Chris Godwin is going to be a whole lot more balanced than what we saw last year. Chris Godwin was the wide receiver 34 in 2023. Mike Evans, like I mentioned, was the wide receiver 10. Since 2019, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin have been pretty much lockstep when it comes to their production year after year. In 2019, Evans was the wide receiver 5, Chris Godwin was the wide receiver 2. In 2020, Evans was the wide receiver 16, Chris Godwin was the wide receiver 15. 2021, Evans was the wide receiver 10. Chris Godwin was the wide receiver 7. 2022, Evans wide receiver 13. Chris Godwin, wide receiver 15. So the most they strayed apart was like 3 wide receiver ranks. Last year, it was 24. Mike Evans was a back-end wide receiver 1, and Chris Godwin was a back-end wide receiver 3. From 2019 to 2022, Chris Godwin played at least 50% of his snaps from the slot. He operated as more of like that big slot role. In 2023, he got moved out of that role entirely. That fell to 24%. Also, keep in mind, in 2022, where he finished as the wide receiver 15, he was coming off a torn ACL. So, in a torn ACL season, or coming off a torn ACL, he was a high-end wide receiver 2. Last year, a second year removed from it, he's somehow like a back-end wide receiver 3. Doesn't make a ton of sense. He's still 28 years old. I don't think he's washed. Liam Cohen has already talked about using Chris Godwin more inside, back in that big slot role, like a Cooper Kupp role, which he saw with the Rams. Now, I'm not saying Chris Godwin's going to come in and beat Cooper Kupp. Obviously, Cooper Kupp's a special dude. But I'm just expecting, Evans and Godwin's production to be more in line. And we've seen it be in line, and they still, outperform this ranking, right? 2020, they're both high-end wide receiver 2s. 2021, they're both wide receiver 1s. But that was with Tom Brady at quarterback. I don't think the offense has the same ceiling as they did a few years ago with Brady at quarterback as they do with Baker. So I think Godwin's going to improve. I think Mike Evans might fall off a little bit just in terms of his production, and that is why I have Evans here as my wide receiver 19. But let me know if that makes sense. I feel like having Godwin back in that big slot, I do think it's going to hurt Evans here, and I think it's going to help Chris Godwin. And then my final wide receiver here, this was a tough one. I went with Malik Nabers as my wide receiver 20. And it might seem high for a rookie, especially one who's not in a great landing spot, but I'm actually going to be a little bit more optimistic than most about this landing spot here. The Giants' passing attack hasn't been great in Daboll's 2 years with the Giants. There's no denying that. Obviously, the quarterback play is a factor with Daniel Jones, but we also just have to look at the weapons he's had. The weapons have been, pretty unbelievably bad. Malik Nabers is infinitely better than anyone else that he's had in that wide receiver room. Saquon Barkley's gone. I think Brian Daboll is going to feed Malik Nabers. You just got to get the ball in this dude's hands. He's going to make plays. I think you get him some volume. I really do think he can deliver you a nice fantasy season. So that's my top 20. I did want to give an honorable mention to Stephon Diggs because I know people are going to go crazy that he's not in here. And I want to just give my explanation why he's not in the top 20. And by the way, like I said, this is one massive tier. These dudes could be ordered around in a lot of different ways. If you have Stephon Diggs in the top 20, I'm not saying it's like a terrible decision or anything, but I just wanted to explain my reasoning here. I'm concerned about Diggs' complete fall off at the end of 2023. Through 9 games, he was averaging 21.7 points per game. In his last 8, he was under 10 points per game, 9.8. He's going to be 30 heading into the season. So if this was like CeeDee Lamb balling out early in the season, then falling off, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you can kind of forgive it. You can say it's just kind of variance, it's just unlucky, whatever. And it could be the same thing for Diggs, right? Maybe he just got unlucky over that last stretch. But when he's getting up there in age, you do have to consider the fact that he might be slipping, might be falling off, and he's entering a very, very crowded wide receiver room with 2 very, very good wide receivers in Nico Collins and Tank Dell. I don't think it would be crazy if Stephon Diggs ended up being their wide receiver 1, but I'd just rather take the 2 younger options who outplayed Diggs last year and already have chemistry with CJ Stroud and this offense. Plus, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, these are probably going to be the guys the Texans are committed to long term. Stephon Diggs, honestly, at this point is a rental unless they extend him. It's currently a 1-year deal. So that's my take there. If you like Diggs, I'm not going to hate on it. It's an ambiguous situation. Any of those guys could win out. But that's my take. So that's going to wrap it up for my top 20. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.